Hello, everybody. I am Jeremy Druin, so happy to be here and certainly appreciate the ISSA for putting on this conference. This is great. I don't think we've had one of these for about 5 years, so it's nice to bring the ISSA back to Louisville. And today it's going to be a little bit less cyber than I usually do and a little bit more on practical privacy and some of the tools we can use in our personal lives to have a bit better privacy. But it does take a little bit of setup to get privacy a little bit more than you think. Has anybody ever heard any claims from VPN companies? Anything in particular jump out at you from a commercial you might have heard or something they say about VPNs?
Say they
Don't keep logs. Anything in particular about how they impact privacy? Like, have you ever heard any of them say like they keep you completely anonymous? No one can see what you're doing. You're totally safe. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to see here, right? Privacy browsers keep you totally private. Ever heard something like that? Maybe from any of the particular brands. So, well, there's a little bit of truth to all of that, but maybe not the way you think. So let's take a closer look at that. So I teach a lot of classes, and my background is in security architecture, penetration testing, cloud security, and some other aspects of cybersecurity. And so definitely enjoy doing a lot of teaching on these topics. When we talk about basic web privacy, we are used to thinking about, well, maybe I need to use a VPN. Perhaps I need to use a privacy browser. Maybe I need to worry about my search engine. They're tracking my searches, right? And those sorts of things. And it's hard to tell which of those do you need, which of them do you don't need. Can you just use one of them and that's just going to solve all of your problems? So we kind of break this down into the problem areas, or what we would call the threats in cyber. We have the operating system itself, right? Things that are being remembered on the hard drive and in your browser history and things like that. So these persistent data points. You also have the client software, which in the case of web privacy is going to be a browser in most situations. And within the browser is the search engine. At least you're accessing the search engine using the browser in most cases. But there's also machines in the middle. There might be proxies that are being used. The biggest proxy that you probably use every day at your house is your internet service provider, right? They get you connected to the web, and so your traffic is flowing through them, and they're passing that traffic on down the line. And then you also have the machines at the end, so the servers that you're actually connecting to that are serving up the content within the web application or the web user interface that you're using. As it turns out, the minimum amount of countermeasures you need for privacy nowadays is really going to be a combination of tools. There's the client software itself that we have to worry about. So we are going to end up needing some kind of a private browser that is going to prioritize privacy over tracking and other goals that a browser might have. Within that, we're going to need a private search engine, and we will also need a VPN. So we're going to end up having to combine all these together. And then if we really want to start to approach anonymity, which is quite a bit different than basic privacy, it's kind of think of like basic privacy is like trying to get 80% of the way there, whereas anonymity is trying to get 99% of the way there. It's always that last effort, last mile that takes the most effort, right? So let's start off with looking at the actual VPN. So one of the things that I have done for this presentation is I built an application in the cloud, and just make a note that on my public GitHub repo is 4 projects, all named Dragonfly, and these are the different components of the project. If you wanted to use this for yourself, you're more than welcome to it. Dragonfly is the application. The Dragonfly Docker builds Docker containers for you. The actual containers are already built for you. If you just want to use mine, then they're built by the Docker Hub project. And then the Dragonfly Terraform project will deploy it into Google Cloud for you if you want to have somewhere to host it. So that's all available on my GitHub right now. So when we browsed to the application, it started to gather the data points from the browser that are used to track us. So with this application, we can literally see printed to the screen those data elements that are commonly collected by JavaScript and other pieces of the web server infrastructure that are used to try to identify you amongst all the other folks that are also visiting the given site. So you might think of common JavaScripts like Google Analytics would be a very popular one. And then also the server itself can see these data points when the browser connects. And from this, these elements can be combined together into a hash, and that can create a fingerprint. So from all this different information that goes down here, you end up with a browser tracking fingerprint that should be relatively unique because it's based on a lot of things like your screen resolution, the brand of browser that you're using, the patch level of the browser, and how much colors does it support, and whether you have different plugins installed or different extensions installed, what kind of CPU you have, and those kinds of things. So if you take a look at the list here, it's quite a list of different things that can be gathered. Now, it depends on which browser you're using, whether or not they can get certain elements. It depends on what kind of software you have installed on your computer as to whether or not, for example, if you don't have Silverlight installed, they can't get the Silverlight version because there's nothing there to gather, right? But overall, you can see there's a lot of different data elements that can be used to generate these fingerprints. Now, if we take a look at the forwarded for field here, this field shows us the IP addresses that we appear to be coming from in this particular situation. So right now, we appear to be coming from the 216 public IP address. And then there's also this 34 address, which is going to be the cloud server that is being used to forward our traffic onto the application. We also have the browser fingerprint, all the user agent, the engine, the plugins, all this other information. So let's turn on the VPN and let's see what that changes about our situation. So we'll connect to whatever random VPN that Proton here connects us to, and then we can refresh our visit to the page to see how this changes our connection. Well, one of the things that the Dragonfly software does is if the data element is the same, then it leaves it in the regular standard font here. If the element changed, it colors it with the blue font. So we can, without having to try to remember what was on the previous page, we can see which elements have changed here. And notice that the IP address changed, right? The forwarded for, we still have the Google load balancer because we're still going through the cloud, but the IP address of our source changed. It's now 138 dot whatever instead of the 216. That caused the browser tracking fingerprint to change. But notice how many of the other elements didn't change, because what's happening is our browser is passing those data elements through the VPN tunnel, and that information is popping out on the other side. So if we take a look at a picture of that, we have this encrypted tunnel offered by the VPN up until we reach the VPN provider. At that point, the traffic goes from the VPN provider back over the regular web. So from the VPN onwards, the information is just passing through unchanged. And we saw that with Dragonfly, where all of those browser data elements were just moving through the VPN. They weren't being altered by the VPN. So it's still possible to mostly track us, with the exception of the IP address. Now, the VPN does add value. So maybe the commercials do kind of go over the top a little bit, but they do add value because they take the local Wi-Fi out of play, and that's one of the most vulnerable areas when you're on the web, is going to be that local connection that you're making. And you might think, well, I just connect from home and it's my own Wi-Fi. Well, still, your Wi-Fi is connected to your internet service provider access point, and that's going through the internet service provider. The VPN also takes your ISP out of play. So the ISP is not as easily going to be able to track and resell your information. Something to think about if you have a nosy ISP. But the VPN clearly does not anonymize the traffic. That's a stretch, right? We could tell a lot of the data elements were actually the same. Besides, if you go through a VPN, but then you just end up logging into Facebook, Facebook knows you're there, right? It doesn't really matter about the VPN. They can see that you logged in with your ID. So if we put a score on the VPN, it did a pretty good job against machines in the middle, right? We took the ISP out of play. We took the local Wi-Fi out of play. So Starbucks isn't tracking us anymore, and the nosy ISP is not tracking us anymore, and so on. So it does well against web proxies as well. And that's why you might see some web proxy companies, like say Zscaler or someplace like that. That's why they might block VPNs, right? Because they know if you connect to that VPN, they won't be able to inspect the traffic anymore. And that's part of the service that they provide. But we really didn't handle anything about the local operating environment. We haven't taken care of anything about this client software that's passing the data elements. And then also the machines at the end are still receiving the exact amount of information minus the IP address that they had received before. So let's start talking about privacy browsers. A lot of different brands out there. We're just going to use one brand as an example for illustration. You don't have to take this too literally, but because you might say, well, I use Firefox Focus or Brave or DuckDuckGo's Android browser, varieties and flavors. But I do like Epic browser because it has some unique features similar to the DuckDuckGo privacy browser that you don't always see in privacy browsers, and that is the ability to have VPN built into the actual browser itself if you want it. And then it also has this interesting anonymization feature. So let's take a look at that. All right, let's take the IP address of our demonstration application, and let's open up an Epic browser window. We'll visit Dragonfly, and we'll let the values load. So the values loaded, and one of the things we noticed is that there's another proxy in the chain here, because we now have 3 IPs that our information is passing through instead of the 2 that we saw before. We still have Google Cloud's load balancer, of course. We're still hosting the app in Google Cloud, but our IP address here is 164, and our exported for is 127, which is going to be the local host. Now, what that local host is telling you is it's giving you a little bit of a glimpse in how Epic is working. It's setting up a local VPN on my local computer, and it's sending the traffic from the browser to that local software, and then that software is pushing it on out. So that just gives us an insight in how it's working. Now, you can turn off the VPN using the icon here. That will let you pick either a different VPN, or it lets you turn the VPN on and off. So this is an option. It's not mandatory in the browser, and that's an important distinction. We'll take a look at another kind of browser here later that has mandatory VPN. And it also has choices of proxies that you can use, because some of them might be blocked where you're at, and you could pick a different one out of the list and see if you could get it working. And you'll see that a lot with VPN-enabled privacy browsers is you'll try it, they'll be blocking whichever node you happen to be going through at the moment. You may have to try again or even switch nodes, or some brands call it switching circuits, in order to get a connection. So, because again, the certain parts of the web are going to try to defend itself from not being able to track you, right? So there's a lot of revenue in that. So let's refresh the browser window, and we see something interesting that happens. Before, when we're using a VPN only, and we can even turn off the VPN just to kind of we can take that out of play, so we can just disconnect from that and even just refresh again to make sure we're not accidentally picking up any information from that. But you'll notice that some of the other data elements will actually change. So let's do this. We'll just close it and reopen it so we can get a good connection. And I think I was messing with Epic there. I don't think it was its fault, because I turned off the other VPN while it was using a VPN. So we'll let's make sure this is turned on. All right. All right, this will still let me show you the anonymization there. We'll just take the VPN out of play for a minute. So when I refresh the screen, we see that this value right here changed. This is the plugins field. If we go down here, we can see a little bit more of these fields. We'll just refresh the screen again. And we'll notice that as we refresh the screen, some of the elements change, some of them stay the same, and it depends on the kind of the randomness of the way Epic is transmitting this information. What Epic is doing is it's randomizing some of these values to make them different on the different visits. So if we use Epic this time around, it may say that we have 6 or 7 plugins, and this particular MIME types and these particular fonts and so on and so on. But if we were to open it back up a second time and look at it, it'll change those around. So it's not really actually reporting the literal data values that are in the browser. What's really installed, it's just kind of making stuff up. And that, because that goes into the fingerprinting of the browser, just randomizing some of these elements throws off the tracking ability of the way that a lot of the tracking systems work, where they're taking fingerprints. If we open up another tab, we should even be able to get even different value just between the tabs. So we don't even necessarily have to close the window. So like over here, our plugins are PDF Viewer, Chrome PDF Viewer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We opened up a second tab. Again, we haven't even actually closed the browser. And you'll notice that the values are different, right? It's actually making those up as it goes. And you can see the list of fonts has changed and the MIME types has changed, even just from tab to tab. Of course, if you close the browser and reopen it, you get the same effect because you're really just opening up a new tab when you open up a new browser window. So with Epic Browser in combination with the VPN, that's an important point. So we can either use the VPN that's built into Epic Browser, or we can stick with the original VPN. Like as an example, I had been using Proton earlier. When those two are combined together, we've now gained an extra step that we didn't have before, because we now have the VPN going to Epic's VPN or to your original VPN, or both if you choose to do it that way. And then we have the automatic HTTPS going to the server. So even if you accidentally browsed to a site over the HTTP version and the server didn't upgrade you, Epic would automatically upgrade your connection to HTTPS. Plus, it's randomizing the information that's coming from your device as it sends that information through the ISP, where the information pops out on the other side of the server. So now the server is not able to track you as readily because those data points are shifting each time that you use a different tab. Now, one of the concerns you may have with Epic, if you're not using your own VPN, is you had to activate the VPN. Notice that up here, the VPN, when you download it, can be in the off position. And if you forget to turn it on, that can be a real problem, right? So we can turn it on here manually, of course. And, that might work okay. But a better idea, I think, would have been for us to have left our original VPN on, and just keep that on all the time, and then just run Epic through it. I think that's a little bit more reliable of a way to have good operational security, instead of trying to have to remember to do all of these things. So we had some really good pros with Epic. It includes an ad blocker for free, randomizes the browser fingerprint, which is a great feature. Got to see that in action. It's fast, and because it includes the VPN, assuming we turn it on, we get all of the features that we had from the VPN before. We do have to remember to turn the VPN feature on. It's not necessarily on by default, and it does not include a secure search engine. So by default, it includes the Yahoo search engine as one of your choices, And you can also pay to get the Epic search engine, but that is a paid upgrade. It doesn't come with the browser by default. So that's something to think about is, are we really getting all three elements with this? So we give it a score here, then we say, well, yeah, it actually did a pretty good job. It took care of the browser fingerprinting by randomizing the values, but we noticed it did not come with a secure search engine, so we can't give it that credit. It also has the VPN, which of course did a good job on the machines in the middle, as we spoke about before. We still haven't really dealt with the machine at the end or the local operating environment. So let's talk a little bit about the search engine as a segue. Regardless of what browser that we're using, when we perform the search engine is getting that search at their end, at the server end, and they're recording that information. So everything that you search for tells a lot about what you're interested in, what you're doing at the time. I've actually heard people say they thought their phones were listening to them because they would be walking or something, listening to podcasts or something like that, and something that they had talked about with their buddy 15 minutes ago appeared in the commercial of the podcast that they were listening to on the daily walk or things like that. It turns out who knows, right? But probably they're not actually listening to you. And here's why. They don't have to, right? They get so much information and insight about your behavior, your preferences, your patterns from fingerprinting and from your search history. They don't need to listen to you, right? They can build a scary good profile just with the information that they're already getting without even having to go through the trouble. Again, I'm not saying applications would or wouldn't do that sort of thing or commenting on that per se, but just to say, I don't even think they really have to bother. It's kind of, we're all kind of like low hanging fruit that are easy to pick off because of search history. So search engines by their nature are making revenue from this information. That's how they can offer these great services that work so well at a low cost of free. But they are picking up the data as a result. So one of the things you can do is use a search engine that at least claims to put privacy first and has all the right words on their disclaimers and does not keep logs or keep permanent tracking information about you or build what are called search histories. Search history is their catalog of information that they have about your searches over time. And so one of the search engines that professes this is the DuckDuckGo search engine. And it actually gives good results. That's one of the main questions I get is well, does it really work as well because, they're not tracking you and those sorts of things. Turns out, actually, the results are pretty good. And it's fast and works well. And so, yeah, I think it's worth giving a try. And they do have a really bold statement on their website describing that they just simply don't track. So if we add DuckDuckGo to our list of tools, this covers the search engine area. And if we were to the VPN and privacy browser of whatever flavor you prefer, now you have search engine, client software, and the machines in the middle covered with this add-on here. DuckDuckGo does also have browser extensions that'll help with making sure that your connections are traveling over HTTPS and also adds the search engine in automatically. And they even have their own Android version of the browser that will include a VPN in the actual browser itself, kind of like Epic was doing for the Windows version here. So they do have some different offerings besides just the search engine. So that brings us to, well, how do we just kind of get everything we want in one package where we don't have to remember to turn the settings on and everything's just automatically configured that way? And in fact, it doesn't even work any other way. It has a private search engine built into a privacy-focused browser that connects over a VPN network, and it, quote, just works. And that brings us to Tor browser. Tor is sometimes associated with folks doing less than honorable things on the web, but actually, from a technical point of view, it's not technically designed to do good things or bad things. It's just designed to have a VPN always on with privacy focus. Of course, a tool like that could be used to try to hide doing bad things, but it has gotten kind of a unfair connotation. The technology was actually designed just to be able to send information over a hostile network like the internet, right, where everybody is always watching. So, and that's exactly what it does. So the way it works at a highest level is that you, in a sense, are making 3 VPN connections. They're encrypted connections, and the encryption changes from hop to hop. So you have one initial connection to the entry guard, then you have at least one connection to a relay node. There could actually be more relay nodes. And then you have at least one exit node, or well, always one exit node. And so you're going to have a minimum of 3 hops. You could have more, but you can't really have any less than this. And then eventually you're going to connect to the web server. Each of those red arrows, except for the last one, is independently encrypted between the machine before and the machine after. So you can kind of think of like encrypt the first arrow gets encrypted into the second arrow, which gets encrypted into the third arrow. So you have like layers of an onion, and that's where the name comes from, the onion router, or Tor for short. So if we start to look at the pros of Tor browser, we have a lot of the same protections as we got from putting the 3 tools together earlier, where we had taken our own VPN combined with our own privacy browser and then using our own private search engine. But we had to know to do those 3 things, and we had to make sure that we were doing all the things. So there was a little bit of a situation where you could have some user error. With this browser here, you have all of it built into a single package. It just makes it easy. It's not necessarily a whole lot more private than what we had talked about before, but it's certainly a whole lot easier than trying to put the 3 tools together ourselves and get it all configured the right way. The downsides is Tor is popular, and it's well known to have this VPN built in, and so it's going to get blocked a lot. The way that it typically shows up as a block is the exit nodes get blocked. So it's not really so much the intermediate machines or the entries, it's the exit nodes that get identified as Tor exits, and those get blocked. So what you may end up having to do sometimes is you may end up having to make another connection, which can be a bit of a hassle. We'll take a look at Tor browser here. Oh, actually, and I think it's trying to search for the URL, which is not what we want. We just want to go to the URL. Okay, now the HTTP is not Tor's fault. The Dragonfly site is running on HTTP and Google Cloud right now. So that is, it was just warning us that the cloud server was running over HTTP. So we have the forwarded for here. It's still ending up at Google Cloud, no surprise there. But the forwarded for here, this is going to be the exit node. So because that's the last IP address in that chain that the server can see from its point of view would be that last hop. And of course, if we change exit nodes, that's going to change as well. As far as the fingerprinting information goes, it's going to be pretty generic. If we refresh the connection, then we can see that the IP address didn't change, but the browser fingerprint did change. So we are getting a different fingerprint on refresh, or if you were to open up a new tab, then you'll end up getting different information as well. So say you open up a new tab to connect to a different site, then you'll end up getting a different fingerprint over here. If we take a look at the value of the fingerprint. That one starts with 427. This one starts with 190. So you can see what's happening is some of the data that it's transmitting, kind of like Epic, is being anonymized or randomized, if you prefer, as it goes across. So now we give this one a grade, and we finally kind of pick up all three things that we want. We've got the client software with the search engine built in, and then we also have protection against the machines in the middle, especially the local Wi-Fi if you're outside of your own home, and the ISP that you're connecting to, whether you're at home or not. So what about browser extensions? Because they get a lot of, I guess, discussion, if you will, in the different forums. Browser extensions, they can help a little bit, but they can also hurt. It just depends on which extension. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Some of the extensions are designed to help you with a few of the problems we talked about, but none of them are holistic. So none of them by themselves can solve these problems on their own. Also, some browser extensions are designed to steal your private information, and that's how they make money. I mean, sure, they might say they're, acting as a built-in calculator or whatever in your browser, but what they're really doing is they're taking the information out of your browser and then giving it to a reseller or a data collector. So it really depends on which one you're using. And it's not the fault of the extensions that are honorable that they can't really protect you fully. It's because they can't act as a VPN and a privacy browser and a private search engine in one little tiny browser extension running inside of a otherwise non-private browser that's siphoning off your data, right? So for the browser extensions, it ranges anywhere from it's okay to have, but it's not really going to get the job done, to they might actually be trying to take your information. Also, the server that you're connecting to might really be out to get you, or at least get your information. So, if you're connecting to a social media platform, it kind of is what it is, right? It's sort of in the name. It's the social media platform. They're taking the data because they need it to do analytics. They need it to do targeted advertising. That is the business model, and they're not shy about saying that. And so there's really nothing being hidden or anything like that. It's just that's how they make money. And so no matter what browser, VPN, search engine combination you use, ultimately, if you're going to connect to a server and give them information, they're going to have that information. And that's really part of operational security, where you kind of have to decide how much of yourself do you want to put out there, right? And what information do you want to share? If you download files from a server and execute that file, if it's an executable, now it has potentially access to your local computer. Scripts may also do similar, so you kind of have to think about those situations as well. Now, if it doesn't matter and you don't care because you're using your throwaway computer, that's one thing. If you're, using the computer that you do banking with, maybe you think about not downloading stuff to that system. So a couple of things to take with you today for you to try is just go see if your email address, maybe your passwords, try to see if these maybe have been compromised. Maybe there is something that you can do to switch to a different email if the email you have is already kind of out there too much. Or maybe you do what I do and you just have a couple of different emails, right? Like I have 3 emails that I kind of float back and forth between. I got one for business, and then I got one for personal stuff that's just ordinary, everyday, who cares stuff. And then I got a whole nother email that I just use like for the bank and those kind of situations. And I just keep them separate. It's no big deal. If you have like Gmail or Hotmail, you can make as many emails as you want, right? Easy to do. So this idea of segmentation, you separate things out so that you don't have to try to protect an email address that you're using for many different things. That would make it very difficult to protect that. If you go out to Have I Been Pwned, you can see if your email address has already been exposed. Spoiler alert, it has, so just so you know. But we can also go out to Have I Been Pwned and find out if the password or passwords that we use commonly have been exposed. So this is a great thing to do. because if through no fault of your own, if that password has already been leaked in some data breach, you wouldn't want to continue to use that particular password, right? You'd want to go ahead and change that. Preferably, you'd have a password manager. Maybe you use 1Password or Dashlane or KeePass or whatever your favorite one is, not LastPass. And you would keep everything inside of that vault. So you might just have that tool generate like 32-character randomly generated passwords. Who cares what it is? It's going to remember it and type it for you anyway, right? And just use that instead. And that way, if you do end up losing a password because the site that you entrusted it to has some kind of a breach, you can just change it and it shouldn't affect any other sites. So that's one to give a try to. Another thing that a lot of folks don't think about is giving away their email. So let's say that you do go through all the trouble to get yourself 3 email addresses, and you've got one of them that you really care about, and you don't want that particular one to kind of be floating around out there. Whenever you interact with certain systems, they might say, well, hey, I want your email, I want your phone number, I want all of these other things. But nowadays, you kind of have to think about that because your email and your phone number and potentially your SIM card in your phone is a target for being able to either track or even worse, maybe try to compromise one of your accounts. So one of the things you really have to do and take away from this, so this is homework, is make sure that you're doing your best to protect your email. You have multi-factor authentication on it, very important. That you are calling your service provider for your telephone and put a PIN number on your account. It's not foolproof, it can still be phished, but it makes it that much harder to do SIM swaps if there's these extra steps that somebody would have to go through to mess with your account. And who knows, if you just put a PIN on your account, maybe they'll just go bother somebody else, right? And they'll leave you alone. A lot of folks will say, well, shouldn't I go put multi-factor authentication on my banking accounts first, right? Maybe start with my bank. I think you should start with your email. And the reason is if a hacker gets a hold of your email, they can impersonate you. And at that point, your multi-factor authentication at your bank might not do as much good because it's really easy to pretend to be you and get around a lot of those systems. So take the security of your email really seriously and start there and put multi-factor authentication on that. Also, if you go through the trouble of having an email address that you're going to use for business situations or situations that you care about more than others, don't give it away. So if you have to have that 10% off coupon at the retailer site that you're visiting, instead of using your real email address, use a temporary email address, get the coupon, and then when you're done, then the email address just evaporates in about 15 minutes. So you don't have to worry about losing that email address as much. I have used temporarymail.com several times. I like it. It seems to be pretty good. There are some other ones that have similar names that I didn't like as much. And when I read their privacy policy, I didn't like the privacy policy as much. And so this is the one that I happen to be using at the moment. But I reserve the right to change my mind at any point if I don't like the privacy policy. So take that into account. All right, and do have about 10 minutes left, so be happy to take some questions that you might have about anything we talked about today.
What did you say about LastPass? You said not LastPass?
Well, yeah, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, a joke, but sort of not really funny. So LastPass has had breaches, multiple breaches. Now, that kind of thing will happen against a high-value target, right? So that in and of itself wasn't great, but what concerned me more so about that situation was how they responded to it. The way that the response was phrased sounded a little bit too flippant, like it wasn't being taken seriously. And then the second breach happened relatively close chronologically to the first breach, so there was kind of like a hit and another hit, and then I think there was a third one actually. Now that I think about it, and so it's more so the pattern and the response and the message that was given in response. It wasn't so much the fact that they happened to have been compromised, because again, that kind of thing can happen to just about any of us, right? but it's how do you respond to that, and what do you say about that? And so, given that there is so many choices of great products in the market, I don't see a need to use LastPass because there's just other things. So as a former customer, I just switched over. In my case, I just switched to 1Password, but I've heard good things about Dashlane. I ended up going with Dashlane because the website didn't have some of the stuff I wanted, but it looked like it was a pretty good product. And a lot of people rave about KeyPass. I haven't personally tried it or used it, but the number of people that have said, well, I really love KeyPass, it's kind of surprising. And I think folks may like KeyPass because you can keep everything local, right, as instead of having it in the cloud. Now, for me personally, I don't want to take that much risk of losing the passwords. So I like the cloud backup options that they offer, assuming that they do pre-encryption. So what I mean by that is they encrypt your passwords, then send it to the cloud. The order is very important. Okay, so you don't want it sent to the cloud and then encrypted because they could recover it, right? You want it to be encrypted locally and then sent up to the cloud. And then that way the cloud can't decrypt the password and recover it. Now, they can't decrypt the password and recover it. So don't lose your main password, right? Because they can't get it back. So, yep. What other questions? Yes.
Do you use Epic as a daily or?
Sometimes, yeah, I kind of like it. It's fast. It's faster than Tor, and it's only doing one VPN hop instead of the 3. You don't have as much protection. You do have to remember to have it all set up correctly. And what I did is because they wouldn't let me pick my search engine, I made DuckDuckGo my start page. So problem solved.
And even though they're proprietary, you trust that their VPN isn't going to be like a man-in-the-middle attack towards your traffic?
Oh, it most certainly could be.
Okay.
So yeah, but their privacy policy is pretty good, and they reveal the ways that they make money. I like that when sites tell me like, we make money this way, and this way, and oh, by the way, would you like to purchase our Epic search engine while you're at it, right? And so I kind of like how they were very forward about it. So if you're just going out and doing your fantasy football picks, I think it's great. If you want to put in the amount of effort that's proportional to the amount of concern that you have about the situation. So if you're going out there and picking stocks, maybe you don't use Epic, right? Maybe go home, use your own network, and use something else, and don't do that kind of stuff at Starbucks. But if you're just checking the weather, like, it's fine, right? So just kind of match the level of effort with the level of return, I think. Yes. This one here? No, this is the email number 2. So this is the business email, and I actually want people to know this email right here. So this is the one I'm saying, yeah, please come and get me, and let me know how I can help. So this one won't be deleted. This is not temporarymail.com. So
They should go explode after 10 seconds.
yeah, right, like Mission Impossible style. But yeah, I do use temporary mail a lot, and I also have like my third email, which is like my kind of like, it's not super secret because obviously if you give it to your bank, the bank knows it, but you wouldn't expect them to turn around and sell that. And if they do, I know who it is, right? So yes.
You had on some of the slides the operating system.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of concerns, especially
Yep.
with Microsoft.
Yeah, and they're bringing it back too, right?
Great.
As an opt-in.
So what would be your preferred operating system? Tails?
Yeah. So again, match the level of effort with the level of return that you're going to get. But if you needed the OPSEC for the OS, I would go with Tails. Yeah, for sure. And I think you had a question.
Yeah, what's your opinion on the services that claim to scan the web for data that's been compromised? Like, are they worth it or necessary?
Worth it is definitely in the eye of the beholder because they charge money for that kind of thing. So you're talking about like LifeLock and was one of the original ones. And then there's been a huge explosion of other offerings since they were the kind of the first super popular one. Value is whether you feel like it's worth it or not, but they are partially effective. mainly, I think the benefit that you would get from services like that is not so much that they can find the information, because you can actually find the information if you just go to Spokio or People Finder or whatever. But it's they take the time to deal with it on your behalf. I think that's kind of what you're really paying for, is the hassle. You don't have to go do it yourself. So you pay them the subscription fee, and they just take care of it. Some of those services also double down as a type of insurance, where if you do end up having your identity stolen, they will again do a lot of the paperwork and the bureaucracy to deal with that situation. So you're kind of paying them in advance for a little bit of insurance that they will spend the hours of hassle to recover your identity if it's stolen, as opposed to you having to do it all yourself. So, but you could technically do everything that they're doing if you want to spend the time. So, yes.
Yeah. So for like, let's say if your email has been, what steps do you recommend?
Well, it's very difficult to recover that unless you already had multi-factor authentication. So the main thing is when you go home today is make sure you get that MFA on there, because if someone gets into your email and then they add the MFA with their phone number, you're in trouble. Like, it's going to be hard to recover that. You might just get yourself a new Gmail at that point.
Yeah. So
But
if you already have that multi-factor, then
if you already have the multi-factor, then you should be okay. You are still vulnerable to cookie theft, right, where they're stealing the JOT tokens. So you got to just be careful that you have your antivirus and anti-malware and everything running, and try not to get phished, because if they're able to install malware locally on your computer, even if you have MFA, they can see that happening, and then they would be able to get around your MFA. But also, if they had malware, they could steal the JOT token. And as long as that JOT token is good, that session token is good until it expires, during that period of time when it's still valid, it's just as good as having your login. So maybe even better, because it's kind of hard to detect. To fight that, some of the better websites are now doing proof of possession tokens, meaning they're tying the token to your physical machines through the TPM chips. So if you steal the token and try to use it on a different device, it won't work. But that proof of possession technology is not as widespread as we would like. Sure. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I noticed the YouTube stops working with a lot of ad blockers.
Mm-hmm.
Any recommendation?
Probably. Now, this is a little bit of trouble, but what you might try is using Pi-hole server. So this is not a client software. This is a DNS server that you would set up at your house on a Raspberry Pi. And so instead of your DNS being your ISP's DNS, it would be the Pi-hole. The Pi-hole is a good DNS server, but it has this extra superpower too, where it keeps lists of sites that are serving ads, including some aspects of, you mentioned YouTube in particular, but of course it's keeping a list of all sorts of sites. It also has the option of adding on extra lists. So if you additionally, instead of just blocking ads, you also want to block objectionable material. Maybe you have kids at home, or you want to block crypto mining sites, or you want to block gambling sites or other kinds of sites. So you can pick lists that are catered to what it is that you want to try to block. That might be a more effective approach, because you're protecting the entire home, regardless of whether it's a television or your iPad or whatever, instead of trying to piecemeal protect individual devices. That can be kind of frustrating, especially if you're trying to protect phones and things that have a teeny little interface and things like that. So I would suggest protecting your whole home. If you are out and about and you're not at your house, the paid versions of VPNs, like Proton VPN as an example, those will filter out ads. And they're essentially, because they're your DNS when you're using their VPN, they're essentially performing the same service as Pi-hole. Now, that is almost always an extra cost. You get the basic VPN for free, but then you pay for all the ad blocking and those extra features as well. So Epic included an ad blocker built into the browser, but that would only work if you were using that browser. And of course, it's only protecting that device that you're using. If you will have other devices in your house that are going to try to track you, that you can't install browsers on. Think about your television set, right? How do you protect yourself from something like that, that's kind of almost more of like an IoT device, that's where you would need the whole house protection with something like Pi-hole. So. All right. Yes.
It was recommended to sign up for websites, whatnot.
Uh-huh.
I guess first name and last
Mhm.
name. Put in the name of website or company.
Yep.
So that way, if they sell your data, receive an email, it says hello, and it'll say the name of the company that
Yeah.
sold your data. Is
Right.
that really worth doing?
Again, worth, value, up to you. So you'll have to kind of decide. But what I can tell you is if you're using Gmail, if you give out your Gmail address, you can put the name of the company in a plus symbol. Gmail will still work normally as if the name of the company wasn't there. But when the email shows up to you, the company who emailed you, they'll be emailing to company name plus your regular Gmail address. So you could use that Gmail hack as possibly as an alternative to tagging the name. But the idea of tagging is effective.
That is better right now. So I can tell them at the drive that my name is Burger King.
Awesome.
So someone knowing that it's not better.
Yeah, it's not too bad. That's still a pretty cool nickname, though. You got anyway. So awesome. Well, thanks very much. I appreciate you all attending today, and thanks for coming out to the conference.